If someone had told me 10 years ago that my life, my carefully constructed fortress of solitude, would be dismantled by the sound of a snapped bicycle chain, I would have laughed. It would have been a dry, quiet laugh, the kind that doesn't really reach your eyes. The kind I had perfected. My world was a curated collection of quiet things. The weight of a hardcover book in my hands. The smell of old paper and dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun slanting through my study window. The low hum of the refrigerator. The predictable click of my keyboard as I translated forgotten histories for university presses, a ghost whispering dead languages into the modern world. My house was my shell, and I was the soft, vulnerable creature inside. Then came the disruption. His name was Cole. He was my neighbor's son, a myth I had only heard about in passing. Mr. Henderson's boy, home from the service for the summer, a temporary fixture, a force of nature contained, for a few short months, in the manicured lawn and beige siding of the house next door. I saw him mostly from a distance, a figure framed by my kitchen window. He was physically present in a way I had never been. Broad-shouldered and sun-darkened, he moved with an easy, unthinking confidence that felt like a foreign language. He mowed the lawn with his shirt off, back muscles shifting under tan skin, a landscape of effortless strength. He fixed sprinklers, rehung shutters, his body a study in practical motion. He was loud, not just in the roar of the lawnmower, but in his very existence. He played music from a portable speaker, a thumping bass line that vibrated through my floorboards and rattled the neat stacks of paper on my desk. He laughed with his father, a deep, booming sound that carried over the fence between our properties. He was, to my quiet life, an invading army. And I, a traitor in my own keep, could not look away. I watched him. I observed him the way an astronomer observes a distant, burning star, with a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound, helpless awe. He was everything I was not. Grounded, solid, uncomplicated, or so I assumed. From my window, he was a two-dimensional cutout of confident, straight masculinity. The kind of man who would never even register my existence, except perhaps as the quiet, strange neighbor who never seemed to go anywhere. The distance between us was more than just a wooden fence. It was a chasm. He was the sun-drenched, vibrant world of the living. I was the dusty, silent archive of the past. We were different species, breathing different air. Acknowledging the pull I felt toward him felt like a form of madness, a self-inflicted wound. So I kept it hidden, a secret ache behind my ribs, a story I told only to myself in the dead of night. My routine was my armor. Wake at 6, coffee black, translate until noon. A simple lunch, eaten while standing at the kitchen counter. More work, a solitary walk as dusk settled. Dinner for 1, read until my eyes grew heavy. Sleep, repeat. It was a life measured in pages translated and cups of coffee consumed. Safe, predictable, numb. The disruption of that routine began on a Tuesday. It was hot, one of those sweltering July afternoons where the air itself feels heavy and wet, a blanket you can't throw off. The cicadas were screaming their deafening song from the trees. I was in my garage, trying to coax a stubborn bolt loose on an old lawnmower engine I was tinkering with. It was my form of meditation, the logical, solvable problems of machinery. Then came the sound, a sharp, metallic crack, followed by a curse that was bitten off halfway through. I froze, wrench in hand. I knew that voice. Peeking through the sliver of space where the garage door was raised a few feet off the ground, I saw him. Cole. He was standing over a vintage 10-speed bicycle, its frame a faded, cheerful blue. He kicked at the pedal, another muttered curse escaping his lips. The chain hung loose and broken, dangling like a dead snake. My heart did a stupid, frantic little dance against my ribs. Go back inside, Elias. It's not your problem. He'll figure it out. But I didn't move. I just watched as he crouched down, his hands, already streaked with grease, probing the damaged chain. He shook his head, frustration radiating from him in visible waves. He stood up, wiped his forehead with the back of his arm, leaving a dark smear on his skin. And then he turned. He looked right at my garage. For a terrifying second, I thought he could see me, a voyeur hiding in the shadows. But his gaze was just sweeping the area, looking for a solution. His eyes, which I had only ever seen as distant points of color, were a startling shade of green, even from 30 feet away. He started walking toward my driveway. Toward me. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My garage was my sanctuary, a place of grease-stained solitude. It was not meant for visitors, especially not visitors who looked like they were carved from sunlight and summer afternoons. I had a sudden, absurd urge to slam the garage door shut, but I was frozen, a statue made of anxiety. He stopped at the edge of the concrete, hesitating. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt with the sleeves torn off, showcasing the defined curve of his shoulders and biceps. There was a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He looked younger up close, less like a confident man and more like a frustrated kid. "Hello," he called out, his voice uncertain. "Anyone in there?" My own voice felt like a rusted mechanism, and used and stiff. I cleared my throat. Yes, it came out as a croak. He took a few more steps forward, ducking slightly to see under the raised door. His eyes found me in the gloom. "Oh, hey, you're Elias, right?" I was stunned he knew my name. I just nodded, my hand still gripping the wrench like a weapon. "I'm Cole, Henderson's son." He gestured vaguely with a thumb toward his house. As if I didn't know. As if I hadn't spent the last 6 weeks cataloging his every appearance in the yard. "I know," I said, and immediately regretted it. Too fast. Too eager. A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his face. "Right. Well, look, this is gonna sound random, but my dad said you're, like, really good with engines and stuff." Mechanical things. I glanced down at the disassembled lawnmower. My hobby. My secret language of gears and pistons. I tinker. I managed. "Yeah, well, I'm trying to fix up this old bike of my grandfather's, and the chain just exploded," he sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "I don't suppose you have a chain tool, or know the first thing about fixing one of these?" Force proximity. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. It had taken my carefully guarded solitude and his vibrant, separate world and was about to smash them together in my 200-square-foot garage. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to make an excuse. "I am Busse. I don't have the right tools. I'm translating a particularly dense Akkadian tablet and cannot be disturbed." But the hopeful, slightly lost look in his eyes short-circuited all my defenses. It was a crack in the confident facade I had built up in my mind, a glimpse of the real person underneath. "Bring it in," I said, and my own voice sounded foreign to me. He broke into a grin, and it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. It transformed his whole face, erasing the frustration. "Seriously? Man, you're a lifesaver." He wheeled the wounded bicycle into the garage, the broken chain clanking against the frame. Suddenly, the space felt small, crowded, charged with an energy it had never known. He was a supernova in my quiet, dusty corner of the universe, and I had a terrible, thrilling feeling that I was about to be pulled into his orbit. He leaned the bike against my workbench, and the garage was instantly filled with him. His scent, a mix of fresh-cut grass, sweat, and something clean like soap. His presence. He was just so much bigger than I had imagined. Not just in height, but in the space he occupied, the air he displaced. I felt like a satellite, suddenly too close to a planet, my trajectory irrevocably altered. I took a breath, trying to ground myself in the familiar. I was the expert here. This was my domain. "Let me see." I moved toward the bike, forcing myself to focus on the metal and grease, not on the man standing less than 2 feet away from me. He watched me, his arms crossed over his chest. I could feel his gaze on my back, a tangible pressure. My hands, usually so steady, felt clumsy. "It's an old one," I said, my voice a little too tight. My fingers traced the rusted lugs of the frame. "Probably from his 70s. It was my grandpa's," Cole said. His voice was closer now. I hadn't realized he'd moved. "He rode it all over the county. My dad wanted to throw it out, but I don't know. I wanted to fix it." There it was again. A flicker of something soft beneath the surface. A connection to the past. It was a language I understood. I looked at the chain. It was a mess. A couple of links were twisted and mangled, and the master link was completely sheared off. You'll need a new chain. But we can probably salvage this one for now, just to get it writable. If you have the missing link, I have no idea, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm good with big stuff. Truck engines, generators. But these tiny, delicate parts, he trailed off, shaking his head. This was the shift. The moment the dynamic I had invented, the untouchable, confident jock and the invisible, nerdy neighbor, crumbled into dust. Here, in my world of precise mechanics, he was the one who was lost. And I, for the first time, had the map. I have a box of old parts, I said, turning to a set of metal shelves against the wall. Might have something that fits. As I rummaged through a tin box filled with greasy odds and ends, I was intensely aware of him, of the sound of his breathing, of the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. My observation was no longer from a safe distance, filtered through a window pane. It was close. High definition. Sensory overload. I saw the tiny, faded scar that bisected his left eyebrow. I saw the calluses on his knuckles as he rested a hand on the workbench. I saw the exhaustion in the slight slump of his shoulders, a weariness that his confident posture usually concealed. He wasn't a golden god. He was just a man. A tired, frustrated man trying to fix his grandfather's bicycle. And that was somehow infinitely more dangerous. Found one, I announced, holding up a small, grimy master link. Let's see if it fits. I moved back to the bike, and he moved with me, leaning in to get a closer look. Our shoulders were nearly touching. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My entire nervous system was on fire. Just focus on the chain, Elias. My hands trembled slightly as I used a pair of pliers to work the broken ends of the chain closer together. I need to get these two ends to meet. Can you hold the wheel steady for me? Keep it from spinning? Sure. He placed a hand on the tire, his other hand coming to rest on the frame, right next to mine. His fingers were inches from my own. I could see the fine, dark hairs on his forearm, the faint network of veins beneath the skin. The air thickened, growing heavy and close. The only sound were the buzz of a lone fly near the ceiling and the ragged tempo of my own breathing. I threaded the master link through one end of the chain. Okay, now the tricky part. I needed to pull the other end of the chain taut to connect it. It required more force than I expected. My fingers, slick with oil, kept slipping. Here, let me, Cole said. His voice was a low rumble right next to my ear. Before I could protest, his hand covered mine, his fingers wrapping around my own to help grip the chain. And the world stopped. It was just a hand, skin and bone and muscle. But it was a brand. A jolt of pure electricity that shot up my arm and detonated somewhere in my chest. His skin was warm and rough against mine. His grip was firm, effortless. All the air left my lungs in a silent rush. This is happening. My mind went completely blank. All the complex machinery of my anxiety, my overthinking, my carefully constructed walls, it all just ceased to function. There was only the shock of his touch, the stunning, terrifying reality of it. For a split second, I forgot what we were doing. I forgot about the bike, the chain, the garage. There was only the weight of his hand on mine. A connection so unexpected and profound it felt like a physical blow. Got it? He asked, his voice still low. I snapped back to reality, my face flushing with heat. I prayed the dim light of the garage hit it. Yeah, I choked out. Just pull together, we pulled. The chain resisted, then gave with a satisfying click as the pins slipped into place. My fingers, still trapped beneath his, fumbled with the clip to secure the link. His hand lingered for a moment longer than necessary. A heartbeat. 2. Then he pulled away. The absence of his touch was as shocking as its presence. A sudden, chilling cold spread across my skin where he had been. I stared down at my own hand as if it belonged to someone else. It looked the same, but it felt different. Branded. There, I said, my voice hoarse. I tested the chain, spinning the pedal. It held. It moved smoothly through the gears. That should hold you for a while. But you should still get a new 1-inch. Wow, Cole said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. That's amazing. I was ready to throw this whole thing in a dumpster. He looked from the bike to me, his green eyes bright, with something I couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude, yes, but something else too. Something more intense. Thank you. Seriously, it was nothing, I mumbled, turning away to wipe my hands on a rag, needing to put some distance between us, needing to reboot my entire operating system. As I scrubbed at the grease, my back to him, the silence stretched. It wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy, weighted with the ghost of that touch. The air was still thick with it. Just when I thought he was about to leave, to take his bike and his supernova presence out of my garage and let my world return to its quiet orbit, he spoke again. You know, he said, his voice softer now, more thoughtful. My dad talks about you sometimes. Says you're this brilliant academic. A hermit, I stiffened. Of course. The neighborhood recluse. The strange man in the quiet house. But you're not what I expected, he continued. I turned back to face him, my guard instantly up. And what did you expect? He shrugged, leaning a hip against the workbench. He wasn't looking at the bike anymore. He was looking at me. Really looking. I don't know. Someone older, I guess. More dusty, a faint, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. Not someone who can basically rebuild a bicycle with his bare hands and has engine parts all over his garage. I felt a ridiculous surge of pride. I like to understand how things work. Yeah, he said, his gaze dropping to my hands, then back to my face. I'm starting to get that. The light outside was beginning to fade, painting the garage in long, deep shadows. The air cooled, and then a low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance. We both looked toward the open door. The sky, visible in a narrow strip, had turned a bruised, angry purple. Looks like a storm's coming, he said, his voice quiet. It does, I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. He made no move to leave. He just stayed there, leaning against my workbench, watching me with those unsettlingly direct green eyes. The garage, my fortress, had become something else entirely. It was a bubble, an isolated world for two, with the approaching storm providing the soundtrack. The air crackled, not just with electricity from the sky, but with a new, unspoken tension between us. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, spattering against the concrete driveway. The sound was loud in the sudden stillness. Guess I'm not riding this thing home just yet, he said with a wry chuckle. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm. He's staying. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The carefully ordered world I had lived in for a decade was gone. It had been washed away by a broken chain, a shared task, and the impossible, undeniable weight of his hand on mine. I was in uncharted territory now, with a storm breaking outside and a different, more dangerous storm building within the four walls of my garage. The rain came down harder, a torrential downpour that blurred the world outside into a wash of gray. It effectively sealed us in. The garage, once my private retreat, was now an intimate, dimly lit space, smelling of rain and oil and the faint, clean scent of his skin. He pushed off from the workbench and wandered deeper into the garage, his curiosity seeming to override any social awkwardness. He ran a hand over the fender of my old, half-restored Triumph motorcycle that sat under a dusty tarp in the corner. "You're restoring this?" he asked, his voice filled with a new respect. Slowly, I admitted, "It's a long-term project. My grandpa had one like this," he smiled, a soft, nostalgic expression that made my stomach clench. He used to take me for rides on the back when I was a little kid. Scared the hell out of me. I loved it. He was sharing a piece of himself. A memory. It felt like a gift. An offering. "They're beautiful machines," I said, finding my footing in the familiar subject. Perfectly balanced. Every part has a purpose. No excess. He looked from the bike to me. "You like things that make sense, don't you?" It was an observation so astute it caught me off guard. Yes, I do, me too," he said, and his voice was so quiet I barely heard him over the drumming of the rain on the roof. "The problem is, not much does." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Especially lately, there it was again. That crack in the armor. A profound vulnerability that I felt an almost painful urge to reach out and soothe. But I stayed rooted to my spot, my hands shoved deep in my pockets." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice gentle. He sighed, turning to face me fully. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast stark shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the weariness in his eyes. I get out of the army, and everyone expects me to have a plan. My dad wants me to go into his construction business. My mom wants me to go to college and get a degree. Everyone has this roadmap laid out for me. He paused, shaking his head. And I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads, and I don't know which way to go. Or if I even want to go down any of their roads. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. He was offering me a look behind the curtain, at the confusion and pressure that lay beneath the confident exterior. He was trusting me with his uncertainty. No one ever really knows which way to go, I said softly. We just pick a path and hope it leads somewhere we want to be. He met my gaze, and the intensity there made the air feel thin. What about you? Is this the path you want to be on? He gestured around the garage, at the books and tools, the quiet evidence of my life. I didn't so much pick it as build it, I admitted. My path is a fortress. It keeps me safe, but it's also a cage. The words came out before I could stop them, more honest than I had been with anyone in years. My own vulnerability offered in return for his. Cole took a step closer, and another, until he was standing right in front of me, the space between us charged and humming. The sound of the rain was a distant roar. The world had shrunk to the few feet of concrete that separated us. Why do you need a fortress, Elias? He asked, his voice a low murmur. He said my name like it was a secret, something precious. My breath hitched. I couldn't look away from his eyes. They were searching mine, asking a question that had nothing to do with walls or cages. Because the world outside of it is complicated, I whispered. I see you sometimes, he said, his voice dropping even lower. Through your window, at your desk. You're always alone. The admission hit me like a physical blow. He saw me too. My secret observations hadn't been a one-way street. He, the sun, had been aware of his quiet, orbiting satellite all along. The thought made my skin prickle with a mixture of terror and a wild, uncontainable hope. You look lonely, he breathed, and it wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a shared secret. Sometimes I am, I confessed, the words tasting like rust on my tongue. He lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. His fingers, rough and calloused, came to rest on my cheek. His thumb stroked gently along my jawline. The touch was electric, 1,000 times more potent than when his hand had covered mine. This was no accident. This was a choice. My heart was going to beat its way out of my chest. This is real. This is happening. Me too, he whispered, and his own confession was a seismic shock that reordered my entire understanding of him. Of everything. The confident, popular golden boy. Lonely. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to my lips. The world seemed to slow down, to hold its breath. I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and unsteady. The question was there in his eyes, a silent, hesitant plea. And I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic and fear, that my answer was yes. I closed my eyes and met him halfway. His lips were softer than I could have ever imagined. The kiss wasn't frantic or hungry. It was a question, a discovery. It was hesitant and slow, a quiet exploration in the rain-soaked dark. It was the taste of uncertainty and a deep, aching loneliness I recognized as my own. It was the most honest conversation I had ever had. My hands, of their own accord, came up to rest on his waist, gripping the soft fabric of his t-shirt. I felt him shudder, slightly under my touch, a tremor of response that sent a fresh wave of heat through me. He deepened the kiss, a soft sigh escaping his lips and mingling with my own breath. In that moment, in the cluttered sanctuary of my garage, with the storm raging outside, the fortress I'd spent a decade building crumbled to dust. And I wasn't scared. For the first time in a very, very long time, I felt completely and utterly safe. The kiss ended as gently as it began. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against mine. We stood there for a long moment, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. The only sound was the rain and the frantic, synchronized beating of our hearts. Elias, He whispered, and the way he said my name was a revelation. I opened my eyes. His were already open, green and deep, and filled with a terrifying, beautiful vulnerability. Cole, I breathed back, and then the rain stopped. As if on cue, the torrential drumming on the roof subsided to a gentle patter, then to a drip. A sliver of pale, watery light filtered in through the garage door, breaking the spell. The real world, held at bay by the storm, was beginning to seep back in. He pulled away, and the loss of contact was a physical ache. A sudden chill. He ran a hand through his hair, looking dazed, confused. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I should go, he said, his voice suddenly strained. He gestured toward the door. The rain's letting up. Panic, cold and familiar, began to creep back in, wrapping its icy fingers around my heart. No, don't go. Don't leave me in the ruins. Cole, I started, but I didn't know what to say. He grabbed the handlebars of the bicycle, his knuckles white. My dad's probably wondering where I am. It was an excuse. A flimsy, transparent excuse. He wheeled the bike to the door without looking at me. Thanks again, he said, his voice tight and formal, all the intimacy of moments before erased. For fixing the chain, he ducked under the garage door and was gone. I stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of the bicycle's wheels crunching on the wet gravel of my driveway. I listened until the sound faded completely, swallowed by the chirping of the first brave crickets after the storm. I was alone again. The silence he left behind was a physical weight. It was heavier, deeper, more profound than the comfortable solitude I had known before. The garage, my sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. The air was thick with the ghost of him, the memory of his touch, the echo of his confession. I touched my own lips. They still tingled. It was a mistake. The thought landed with the brutal force of a punch to the gut. It had been a mistake. A moment of storm-induced madness. A flicker of curiosity for him, a cataclysmic event for me. He was straight. He had to be. He was just confused, lonely, and I was there. A safe, secret port in a storm. I stumbled back to my house, my legs unsteady. I closed the door behind me, locking it, as if that could keep the crushing weight of what had just happened from following me inside. But it was already in me. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, my body humming with a nervous energy. The anxiety was a nest of bees in my stomach. I went to the kitchen window, the one that overlooked his yard, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm. And there he was. He was loading equipment into the back of his father's work truck. He moved with a forced, jerky energy. He didn't stretch or smile. He just worked. Our eyes met across the lawn. It was only for a second, a fleeting, charged moment. I saw a flash of something in his expression, panic, regret. Then he looked away, slamming the truck's tailgate shut with unnecessary force. He got on the driver's side and drove off without a backward glance. He didn't look back. The bees in my stomach swarmed. The hope that had bloomed in my chest overnight, a fragile, tentative thing, withered and died. The silence began. It was a living entity, a suffocating presence in my once peaceful house. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of an appliance, only served to emphasize the profound absence of sound from next door. There was no music from a speaker, no booming laughter. My solitude, once my greatest comfort, was now my punishment. The quiet I had so carefully cultivated was tainted. It was no longer a peaceful emptiness. It was a void shaped exactly like him. Every corner of my house, every moment of my day, was haunted by his absence. I tried to work. I sat at my desk, staring at the ancient text on my screen, but the letters swam before my eyes, meaningless squiggles. My mind was stuck in a loop, replaying every moment in the garage. The brush of our hands, the weight of his stare, the soft, hesitant pressure of his lips, and then the crushing finale, the abrupt departure, the look in his eyes that morning. Regret. It had to be regret. The self-recrimination was a relentless tide. I was a fool, a naive, lonely fool who had mistaken a moment of vulnerability for something more. I had misread everything. I had built a fantasy out of a shared look and a moment of physical contact. I had projected all my own secret, desperate, longing onto him. I'd scared him off. The strange, quiet neighbor who turned out to be not just a hermit, but a queer one. Of course he ran. A day passed. Then two. The silence from next door was absolute. I saw his truck in the driveway in the evenings, but I never saw him. The house was dark, the yard empty. It was as if he had been erased. The fortress I had built was gone, and I was left exposed, shivering in the ruins. The cage was broken, but instead of flying free, I felt naked and terrified. I had tasted connection, a real, tangible connection to another human being, and now the memory of it was a form of torture. On the third day, I gave up. I couldn't work. I couldn't read. I couldn't even think. I was just a vessel for anxiety and a hollow, aching grief for something I had never even really had. I decided to go for a walk, something I hadn't done in days. I needed to escape the suffocating silence of my house. I put on my shoes, my hands shaking slightly, and opened the front door. And I froze. He was there. Cole was sitting on my front steps. He was just sitting there, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He was wearing the same torn t-shirt from the other day. He looked exhausted. He looked broken. He must have heard the door open, because he looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face pale beneath his tan. The moment our gazes locked, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. He stood up slowly, as if every muscle ached. "Elias," he said, and my name was a ragged whisper. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with 1,000 unshed emotions. Relief, anger, fear, hope. It was a chaotic storm inside me. Can we talk?" he asked, his voice cracking on the last word. I just nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He walked past me into my living room, the same living room I had paced for 3 days, tormented by his absence. He didn't sit down. He just stood in the center of the room, looking lost. I closed the door, the soft click echoing in the tense silence. "I'm sorry," he blurted out, the words tumbling from him in a rush. "I'm so sorry, Elias. For just running. For ignoring you. I've been a coward." He finally looked at me, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes stole my breath. This wasn't the confident god from the yard. This wasn't even the frustrated kid from the garage. This was someone else. Someone stripped bare. I freaked out, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "What happened in the garage, it was the realest thing that's ever happened to me. And it terrified me. My carefully constructed narrative of his regret and my foolishness began to crumble. I thought you were scared of me," I whispered, the admission costing me everything. He let out a harsh, broken laugh. "Of you? No, I was scared of me. Of this," he gestured between us. "I've spent my whole life doing what was expected, being the person everyone wanted me to be. A good son, the tough soldier. And then I met you, and none of that mattered. It was like, for the first time, I could just be me, and the person I am when I'm with you. He scares the hell out of me. Because I don't know him." He took a shaky breath. I drove around for hours after I left. I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. A fluke. That I was just lonely. But it wasn't a fluke. I haven't been able to think about anything else. About anyone else. I close my eyes, and I see you. I feel. He trailed off, his jaw tight. This was it. The clarifying conversation. The moment where everything could either fall into place or shatter into a million irreparable pieces. "What do you feel, Cole?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. He met my gaze, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "I feel like I've been holding my breath my whole life. And when you kissed me, I could finally breathe." The confession landed in the quiet room and expanded, filling every corner, chasing out all the doubt and fear and self-recrimination of the past 3 days. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I closed the distance between us, my feet moving before my brain could register the decision. I stopped in front of him, so close I could see the frantic pulse beating in his throat. "I was scared too," I said softly. "I built my whole life around being alone because I was afraid of exactly this. Of feeling something so powerful it could break me. Is that what this is?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Something that could break us?" "No," I said, and a fierce, unfamiliar certainty rose in me. "It's the only thing that could ever make us whole." And then I reached out and took his hand. His fingers laced with mine, a perfect fit. His hand was warm, solid, real. Not a ghost, not a memory. He squeezed my hand, a silent message of reassurance, of commitment. I don't know what this means, Elias. I don't know where we go from here. All I know is I don't want to go anywhere without you. A slow smile spread across my face, a real one that reached my eyes and warmed me from the inside out. Then stay, it was that simple and that complicated. He didn't leave that day. He stayed for dinner, a clumsy meal of takeout pizza we ate sitting on my living room floor. We talked for hours. We talked about his time in the army, the crushing weight of expectations. I talked about my work, about the quiet loneliness that had been my constant companion. We laid our fears and our histories out between us like cards on a table. Later, as we sat on the couch, a comfortable silence settled between us. He was leaning against the armrest, and I was at the other end, a safe distance between us. But the space didn't feel empty. It felt potential. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, worn key. He held it out to me on the palm of his hand. "What's this?" I asked. "It's the key to my truck," he said, his expression serious. "I know it's not much, but it's my only real escape route right now, and I want you to have it, so you know that wherever I go, you can come with me. Or, if you ever need to get away from all this," he gestured at my books and my quiet house, "you can." It was more than a key. It was a promise, a tangible act of commitment, an invitation into his life, into his future, whatever that might be. It was the most romantic gesture I had ever witnessed. I took the key from his hand, my fingers brushing his. The metal was warm from his pocket. "I'm not going anywhere," I said softly. "Good," he breathed, a look of profound relief on his face. "Because neither am I." The next morning, I woke up to a sound I had never heard in my house before. The clatter of a coffee mug being set on a counter. The soft footsteps of another person. I walked into my kitchen, my heart doing a slow, happy turn in my chest. Cole was there, shirtless, wearing a pair of gray sweatpants. He was standing at my counter, pouring hot water into my French press. My French press. He looked up as I entered, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was a smile meant only for me. "Morning," he said, his voice husky with sleep. "I figured you'd be up soon. I hope you don't mind." I let myself in. He had used the front door, which I had left unlocked for the first time in a decade. "I don't mind," I said, and the words felt ridiculously inadequate to describe the swell of emotion in my chest. This was it, the new beginning, the domestic intimacy I had only ever read about in books. It was real. It was him in my kitchen making me coffee. The mundane had become magical. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We just drank our coffee, sitting at my small kitchen table, the morning sun streaming in through the window. The silence wasn't empty or anxious. It was full, comfortable, a shared space where words were unnecessary. Later that day, he went back to his house. I watched him from the window, but this time there was no anxiety, no longing, just a quiet certainty. He returned an hour later with a duffel bag and threw it on my couch. "My dad's asking questions," he said with a shrug. "It's easier if I just crash here for a bit." "If that's okay, it's okay," I said, my heart soaring. And just like that, my life changed. My quiet, solitary routine was beautifully, irrevocably disrupted. My house was filled with his presence. The sound of his music, which I now found I didn't mind. The smell of his shampoo. The sight of his worn-out boots by my front door. My fortress had become a home. I look back now at the man I was before that sweltering July afternoon. The man who measured his life in quiet, predictable increments. The man who thought safety was the same thing as happiness. He feels like a stranger to me, a ghost from a forgotten history. Cole was the plot twist I never saw coming. He was the loud, vibrant, beautiful chaos that crashed into my ordered world and showed me what it truly meant to be alive. He didn't just break down my walls. He helped me see that I never needed them in the first place. Sometimes when I'm working at my desk, I'll look up and see him in the yard, not through a window, but through the open door. He'll be working on his grandfather's bicycle, which is now in perfect, gleaming condition. And he'll look up, and he'll catch my eye, and he'll smile that smile that still makes my stomach flip. In those moments, I realized that we weren't just fixing a broken bicycle chain in the garage that day. We were fixing each other. We were taking the broken, lonely pieces of ourselves and, with a little bit of trust and a whole lot of courage, we were finally making them whole.